Picture the scene. It's 1923, Cairo, Egypt. You're inside the Grand Continental Hotel, and a wealthy British lord is lying on his deathbed. He's got this raging fever, and every breath is a struggle. And just a few months before this, he was the man who opened a 3,000-year-old tomb.
This was the warning. The words supposedly carved the entrance to that very tomb. Now, as we're about to see, for a whole lot of people, this wasn't just some dusty old superstition. No, this was a prophecy that was about to come true in the most chilling way imaginable.
And right here, this is where the legend of the Pharaoh's curse is born. It all starts with its most famous victim in a series of events so strange, so unbelievable, they captured the world's imagination and its fear.
I mean, just look at how this all went down. At the exact moment Lord Carnarvon takes his last breath, the entire city of Cairo is plunged into total darkness. At that very same instant, thousands of miles away back home in England, his favorite dog Susie lets out one last howl and just drops dead. And if that wasn't enough, just 12 days earlier, a novelist had written an open letter warning him that a terrible punishment was coming. With a story this good, you can bet the newspapers went into an absolute frenzy.
And that frenzy, it only got worse. In just the 6 years after that tomb was opened, a shocking 22 people, all of them connected to the discovery in some way, would meet an early grave. It was like a domino effect of death. First Carnarvon, then an American financier visits the tomb and dies from a fever the very next day. The radiologist who x-rayed the mummy? Dead. Even the journalist who made the curse story famous in the first place, Arthur Weigel, he dies of a fever and becomes number 21 in his own list. Maybe the most tragic story is Richard Bethel, the archaeologist's secretary. After he died, his devastated 78-year-old father jumped from his 7th-floor apartment. It really seemed like some dark, unstoppable force was at work.
So, you have to be asking, what on earth did they find down there that could unleash this kind of supposed fury? Well, to understand that, we need to rewind a little bit, to the moment of the discovery itself. A find so massive it would literally change history.
So, meet our main guy, Howard Carter. He's a British archaeologist, and he is obsessed with finding the lost tomb of a forgotten boy king, Tutankhamun. His sponsor, Lord Carnarvon, had already sunk a fortune into this search for 15 years with zero luck, so he gave Carter one last season. It was do or die. And then, November 4th, 1922, a worker's shovel hits something hard. It's a single step carved right into the rock. They frantically clear away the sand and reveal an entire staircase leading down to a sealed door. And on that door, a name, Tutankhamun.
So on November 26th, with Carnarvon right behind him, Carter drills a small hole in the door. He holds up a candle, and as the flame flickers in the ancient air rushing out, Lord Carnarvon can't stand the suspense. He asks that now famous question, "Can you see anything?" And Carter, just totally mesmerized by the glint of gold, he can barely speak. He just whispers, "Yes, wonderful things."
And let me tell you, wonderful doesn't even begin to cover it. This wasn't some looted tomb. It was a perfect time capsule, untouched for 3,000 years. We're talking over 5,000 priceless objects. A death mask made of 10 kilos of solid gold. A dagger with a blade literally forged from a meteorite that fell from the sky. It was, hands down, the greatest archaeological discovery in the history of the world.
Okay, so you have this unbelievable discovery and this terrifyingly high body count. The legend of the curse seems undeniable, right? Well, this is where our story takes a very sharp turn. It's time to start asking some hard questions.
And the biggest question of all is this one. That chilling warning, death shall come on swift wings, the very thing the entire curse is built on. Where did it actually come from?
Brace yourself for this one. The truth is, it was a lie. Completely fake. Years later, one of the team members admitted what really happened. A journalist kept pestering him, asking if they'd found any curses. They told him no, but they didn't exactly deny it was possible either. They just gave him, in his words, a slight smile and let his imagination run wild. The most famous curse in the world was born because a reporter had a deadline and the archaeological team played along.
So once you pull out that main pillar, the whole rest of the story starts to look, well, pretty shaky. It's time to push all the superstitions aside and let a little bit of logic and science into the room.
Okay, let's just break this down, one by one. That super dramatic, citywide blackout? Yeah, turns out power outages were a daily headache in 1920s Cairo. A total coincidence. The dog dying at the exact same moment? Not quite.
When you actually factor in the time zone, Susie the dog died hours later. And that spooky mark on the mummy's cheek that supposedly matched Carnarvon's bug bite? That story was planted by a rival newspaper that was furious they didn't get the exclusive rights to the story. And finally, Lord Carnarvon, he wasn't some healthy guy struck down in his prime. He was chronically ill. The whole reason he was in Egypt was for the warm, dry climate to help his health.
But what's really interesting is that science does have a potential explanation for why some people got sick. See, sealed-up tombs can be the perfect breeding ground for some nasty ancient molds, like this stuff, Aspergillus niger. You crack open that tomb, you breathe in those spores, and you can get a really severe lung infection. And back in the 1920s, before antibiotics, an infection like that could absolutely be a death sentence.
But the real, final nail in the coffin for the curse came in 2002. The British Medical Journal decided to finally put this thing to the test, scientifically. They tracked 44 Westerners who were there at the time of the discovery and split them into two groups, the exposed group who actually went inside the tomb and the unexposed group who didn't. And the results are pretty clear. The people who were supposedly cursed lived to an average age of 70. The ones who were uncursed, they lived to 75. There was basically no difference. In fact, another look at the numbers showed that the so-called cursed group actually lived a little bit longer than the average person of their time. So if there was anything at play, it was more of a blessing than a curse.
But you know, there's one last really simple test we can run. If this curse was real, who should have been its #1 target? Who should have been the first and most definite victim?
Let's just take a look at the survivors. Lord Carnarvon's own daughter, Lady Evelyn, she was one of the first people to set foot in that tomb. She lived to be 78. The doctor who actually performed the full autopsy on King Tut's mummy, handling the body for hours on end, he lived to the ripe old age of 87. And then, of course, there was the main man himself, target #1, Howard Carter.
Carter was the guy who drilled the hole. He breathed that first puff of 3,000-year-old air. He unwrapped the mummy with his own 2 hands. If anyone on Earth was cursed, it had to be him. And yet, he lived for another 16 years, dying of natural causes in 1939. For the rest of his life, reporters would ask him about the curse, and he'd give them the same simple, undeniable answer. I am still alive.
And this brings us to a final, really fascinating idea. For the ancient Egyptians, real death wasn't when your heart stopped beating. The true death, the ultimate end, was when your name was spoken for the very last time. And for 3,000 years, King Tut's name had been completely erased from history. He was forgotten. In their eyes, he had suffered that true final death.
Which really leaves us with this final question to think about. What if Carter's discovery didn't unleash a curse of death at all? What if it did the exact opposite? It took a king who had been totally forgotten and made his name one of the most famous on the entire planet. Thanks to this discovery, Tutankhamun's name will now live forever. So maybe the real story here was never about a curse bringing death, but about a discovery granting one forgotten king his greatest wish, eternal life.